The gods' arrogance in the deepest reaches of the galaxy. There existed beings who called themselves gods. They were ancient, powerful, and invincible. For eons, they ruled over entire civilizations with nothing but a wave of their hands or a glance. Their power was limitless, their arrogance boundless. To them, no force in the universe could ever threaten their reign. They believed they were untouchable, untouchable, and above all, the supreme rulers of all. The gods lived in a palace built within the heart of a dying star. It was a place of unimaginable beauty, filled with shimmering lights and ever-present energy. They were surrounded by their servants, beings of pure energy, who worshipped them with unquestioning devotion. The gods spent their days basking in luxury, discussing the fate of entire civilizations, and delighting in the fear that their names struck into the hearts of all beings. But despite their immense power, the gods had become bored. They had crushed every rebellion, destroyed every empire that dared to challenge their might. There was no longer any worthy adversary in the universe. The galaxy had become a playground for them, a place to rule without fear and with no challenges. Left, they turned inward, basking in their own superiority. One evening, as the gods gathered in their grand hall, surrounded by golden light and the hum of cosmic energy, they laughed amongst themselves. "We are eternal," said the first god, his voice booming through the chamber. "Nothing can touch us. The universe exists only for us." Another god, a fierce warrior known for her brutality, nodded in agreement. "We have destroyed everything. No one dares challenge us. Even the stars bow before our will." The gods sat back on their thrones, each adorned in shimmering armor made of the most precious metals in the universe. They had everything they could ever desire: power, wealth, immortality, and yet there was a sense of emptiness in their eyes. The thrill of victory had faded. The thrill of fear from others had vanished. All that remained was a quiet, suffocating silence. At that moment, a servant entered the chamber, his face pale with fear. He dropped to his knees, his voice trembling. "My lords, there is something strange in the depths of space. A signal, ... a signal from an unknown source. It is human-made." The gods looked at one another, puzzled. "Humans?" One god asked, his voice filled with disdain. "They are nothing but primitive beings. They barely even understand the basics of space travel. How could they have sent a signal?" The servant bowed his head. "It is unlike anything we have ever encountered. The signal grows stronger. It is not a cry for help. It is ... something more." The gods laughed at the servant's words. "A human signal. Let me see this signal," said the second god. He gestured lazily, and the air shimmered as the signal appeared before them. It was an encrypted message, no larger than a flicker in the vastness of space, but it carried with it an energy that seemed to pulse with purpose. They examined it, their interest piqued. "It's a joke," said the third god. "It is nothing more than a child's play." But there was a strange feeling creeping into the hearts of the gods, a feeling they hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. The signal did not fade. It remained there, stubborn and constant. And as the gods looked at it, they began to feel ... uncomfortable. The arrogance they had worn like a crown began to falter. Could this signal be a warning, a challenge? No, that was impossible. There was no force in the universe that could dare defy them. "Destroy it," ordered the first god. "We have no time for this nonsense." But something unexpected happened. The signal did not disappear. Instead, it expanded. It grew larger. It spread like a wave across the galaxy, shaking the very fabric of space. The gods stood in silence, staring at the expanding signal. "What is this?" One god whispered, his eyes narrowing. This was no ordinary signal. It was an invitation to something greater, something beyond their understanding. For the first time in eons, the gods felt fear. It was a fear that had long been forgotten. It was the fear of the unknown. The servant spoke again, his voice barely audible. "My lords, ... it is coming. The source of the signal, it approaches." The gods stared at the servant. "Impossible," said the first god. "No one dares approach us. No one." But the signal was not just a message anymore. It was a warning. The gods could no longer ignore it. Something was coming. Something from beyond their understanding. A force they had never encountered. The gods rose from their thrones, their eyes glowing with fury. "No one dares challenge us," said the second god, a flame igniting in his chest. "We shall destroy whatever this is." But deep down, they knew. They could no longer ignore the truth. Their reign was about to be tested. As the gods prepared to act, the vast expanse of space outside their palace flickered with light. The first stirrings of change had begun. The gods would soon face the one thing they had never expected. A challenge. The human warship the gods had been rulers for longer than anyone could remember. They had crushed countless civilizations, reduced entire worlds to ashes, and rewritten the history of the galaxy. To them, the idea that anyone, let alone humans, could threaten their rule was laughable. And yet, as the signal continued to grow, the gods' confidence started to waver. They had never encountered a force that could not be easily dealt with, but this was different. Across the galaxy, hidden in a forgotten corner of space, a ship like no other was moving towards the gods. It was sleek, black, and gleamed with an aura of power that sent ripples through the void. This was not a ship like the others. It wasn't crafted from metals or energy shields like the gods were accustomed to. This ship was something far more dangerous. It was the Erebus, humanity's most advanced warship, and it was powered by technology the gods could not even begin to comprehend. Captain Arya stood at the helm of the Erebus, her face calm but her eyes sharp. The crew around her were equally focused. They had been waiting for this moment. They had prepared for it for years, knowing that one day they would have to face the arrogance of the so-called gods. "You've all heard the stories," Arya said, her voice calm, yet full of quiet strength. "The gods think they're invincible. They think nothing can challenge them. But we know better. We've learned their secrets. And now we will show them the truth." Her words resonated through the crew. This wasn't just about a fight. This was about exposing the lies the gods had spread across the galaxy. It was about revealing the truth that the gods, in their arrogance, had convinced everyone that they were immortal, that they could never be defeated. But humanity had learned to see beyond their deception. The Erebus had been built with the knowledge of humanity's greatest scientists, engineers, and strategists. It was a marvel of technology, designed specifically for this mission, to face down the gods and strip them of their false crown. Captain Arya's fingers flew across the control panel. The ship responded immediately, its engines roaring to life, sending it hurtling through the void of space. As the Erebus sped toward the god's domain, its sensors began picking up unusual energy signatures. The god's palace, a fortress in the heart of a dying star, was near. They were close. "Prepared for Phase 1, Arya ordered, her voice steady, but there was an edge to it. A sense of anticipation filled the air. This wasn't just a battle. It was the beginning of a new era, an era where humanity would no longer live in the shadow of the gods. The crew members moved quickly, their hands moving across consoles, activating systems and preparing weapons. It was a battle they had been preparing for their whole lives. The gods had never seen a ship like this before, and they would soon learn how badly they had underestimated humanity. Back at the gods' palace, the ancient beings continued their conversation. They were still laughing at the human signal, dismissing it as nothing more than a joke. But then, the sky above their palace began to shimmer, a flash of light, a burst of energy, and the Erebus appeared out of nowhere, its engines blazing with unearthly power. The gods froze. Their eyes widened as the human ship glided toward them, seemingly unaffected by the powerful energy fields that protected their domain. "Impossible," one of the gods muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. The gods scrambled to react. Their palace's defenses began to activate, sending waves of energy toward the Erebus. But the ship was prepared. Its shields absorbed the blasts with ease, redirecting the energy back at the gods' defenses, shaking their celestial throne room. They're deflecting our energy, the second god said, his voice filled with shock. "This cannot be. No one can survive our attacks." But the Erebus didn't just survive. It pushed forward, undeterred, its sleek form cutting through the energy blasts like a blade through water. Humanity's greatest creation was proving to be more powerful than anything the gods had ever known. Inside the Erebus, Captain Arya smiled. "Phase 2, she said softly. The ship's weapons powered up, glowing with an eerie blue light. The crew held their breath as the ship's cannons locked onto their target, the heart of the gods' fortress. The battle was about to begin. The gods, for the first time in their eternal existence, were facing something they couldn't control, something they couldn't understand. And it was coming for them, faster than they could react. As the Erebus unleashed its first devastating strike, the gods realized the truth they had been so quick to ignore. They were not invincible. They were not gods. They were simply powerful beings who had long hidden their true weaknesses. And now, humanity was going to make sure they knew it. The first encounter the gods had never felt fear before. They were ancient, powerful beings who had controlled the fate of countless civilizations. They were revered as gods, their very names whispered in awe across the galaxy. But now, in the face of a human warships, something they had never considered, a threat fear, began to creep into their hearts. The Erebus hovered before their celestial palace, its engines humming with energy. From the gods' perspective, it appeared small and insignificant against the vastness of their power. Yet, as the ship advanced, it exuded an undeniable presence that made even the mightiest gods pause. It was as if the ship itself was a force of nature, a storm waiting to break. Inside the Erebus, Captain Arya stood before the command console, her eyes fixed on the shimmering form of the god's palace. Her fingers lightly brushed the controls as she gave the order: target the heart of the fortress, disable their shields. She knew this wasn't just another mission. This was the moment humanity had been waiting for. The Erebus wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of defiance, a declaration that no one, no god, no ruler could claim the universe as their own. This was about more than a battle. It was about destroying the illusion of the gods' invincibility. The first blast struck the gods' defenses, and the shockwave rattled the gods' palace. The gods, who had grown complacent over the millennia, scrambled to respond. Their immense power, which had once made them untouchable, was now being challenged. Waves of energy surged from the gods, trying to break the Erebus apart, but the human warship absorbed the energy with ease. The ship glided effortlessly through the explosions, its dark hull gleaming in the light of the surrounding chaos. "Impossible," the first god whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "How are they doing this? No being has ever survived." "Our attacks," the second god, the warrior who had once crushed entire fleets with a single thought, was now trembling. "They're using technology we've never seen before. It's beyond anything we've encountered." As the battle raged on, the Erebus continued to strike, each hit more precise than the last. The gods, once powerful and untouchable, were now scrambling to defend themselves against an enemy they had never even considered. They had been so sure of their superiority, so certain that nothing could stand in their way. But now, with every passing moment, they realized the truth. They were not gods. They were merely beings with power, and their power was not infinite. Captain Arya watched from the command center, her calm demeanor betraying the intensity of the moment. She had been trained for this her entire life. She knew the gods would fight back, but she also knew they were vulnerable. The Erebus was designed not only to fight, but to uncover the weaknesses of those who thought themselves invincible. "Phase 3, Arya ordered. "Focus all energy on their central core. Let's see if their arrogance can withstand the truth." The Erebus powered up, its weapons charging for the final assault. As the energy built, Arya couldn't help but think about how far humanity had come. Once considered a primitive species, they now stood on the brink of something extraordinary. The gods would soon learn that the strength of humanity was not in their size or their weapons, but in their will to fight for what was right. Outside the Erebus, the gods were in disarray. Their palace shook as the Erebus fired again. This time, the blast was different. It wasn't just a weapon. It was the embodiment of human ingenuity, a symbol of everything the gods had underestimated. The blast cut through the heart of the palace's defenses, and the gods watched, horrified, as their once impenetrable shields cracked, the first sign of their impending defeat. "What is this?" the second god shouted, his voice now a mix of rage and fear. "This cannot be. We are the gods of the universe. No one has ever dared challenge us like this." But now there was no denying it. Their power was fading. The Erebus had broken through their defenses. They could no longer deny the truth. Suddenly, the voice of the third god rang out, cold and calculating. "We have no choice. We must fight. Back with everything we have. These humans, ... they must be destroyed." The gods' eyes glowed with fury. Energy swirled around them, gathering in the air like a storm about to break. For the first time in their existence, they felt true desperation. The battle had shifted. They were no longer the predators. They were the prey. The Erebus moved forward, ready for the next round. Its crew braced for the gods' final attempt at retaliation. But Arya, calm as ever, was already planning the next step. "They think they can destroy us," she said quietly, "but they don't realize that we have something they never will, the ability to adapt." With that, the crew of the Erebus fired. Once more, their energy blasts turning into a focused beam that sent shockwaves through the gods' defenses. For the first time, the gods began to fear the humans, and that fear only grew as the truth became undeniable. The truth revealed. The battle raged on, the once pristine palace of the gods now a battlefield. Energy blasts, waves of light, and cosmic shockwaves filled the space around the Erebus and the gods' fortress. The gods, who had ruled for eons, were now fighting for their survival against the very beings they had once dismissed as weak and insignificant. On board the Erebus, Captain Arya stood resolute, her gaze never wavering from the battle unfolding before her. The gods' fortress, a symbol of their supposed invincibility, had been cracked. Their once impenetrable shield was now nothing more than a shattered reflection of their arrogance. Target their core. We need to end this now, Arya ordered, her voice calm but filled with determination. This was the moment they had been waiting for, at the moment when the truth about the gods would be exposed for all to see. The Erebus adjusted its course, its weapons charging with an energy more powerful than anything the gods had ever seen. The crew had worked tirelessly to ensure that this moment would come. The moment when humanity would prove that even the most powerful beings in the universe were not untouchable. Meanwhile, the gods, their eyes glowing with fury and disbelief, tried to regroup. Their once unshakable confidence was crumbling. The god of war, who had led countless battles, was now reduced to a trembling figure. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice thick with fear. "How can they have broken through our defenses? How can we be losing?" The other gods exchanged uncertain glances. They had never faced an opponent like this before. Their power had always been enough to crush any enemy, any rebellion. But the humans had turned the tables. They had discovered their weaknesses, exploited their arrogance, and now the gods were on the brink of collapse. "We are gods," shouted the goddess of the stars, her voice ringing with desperation. "No one can defeat us. We have ruled the galaxy for millennia. We will not fall to mere mortals." But her words, once so powerful, now rang hollow. The gods could feel their power, their control was slipping away. The Erebus was closing in, its weapons prepared to strike at the heart of their fortress, the very core that had kept them in power for so long. "Phase 4, Arya whispered, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. "Let's finish this." The Erebus fired once more, and this time it was different. The energy blast, focused and precise, hit the god's core directly. The blast reverberated through the galaxy, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze. The god's fortress shuddered violently, the walls cracking and collapsing under the sheer force of the human weapon. Inside the palace, the gods screamed in agony, their power draining away. Their immortality, their supposed invincibility, was nothing more than an illusion. They had built their empire on fear and deception, convincing the universe that they were gods. But now the truth was clear. They were no more powerful than the civilizations they had destroyed. As the Erebus continued its assault, the gods' cries grew fainter. Their bodies, once glowing with divine energy, were now flickering, their forms weakening. The goddess of the stars, who had once been the most feared of all, collapsed to her knees. We are not gods, she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "We are just like them." The second god, the god of war, who had once seen himself as invincible, looked up at the Erebus with wide, terrified eyes. We were wrong. All these centuries, all these lies, And then, in the final moments of their existence, the gods understood they were not eternal. They were not above all others. They were simply beings who had been granted power, but that power had been fleeting. The humans had come, and they had exposed the truth. The gods were not gods at all. Captain Arya stood on the bridge of the Erebus, her expression unreadable. The battle was over. The gods had been defeated. The Erebus powered down, its weapons still humming faintly, ready for the next challenge. As the galaxy watched, Arya broadcast the truth to the farthest reaches of space. The so-called gods are nothing but false rulers. Their power was a lie. We, the humans, are the true masters of our fate. The message echoed across the galaxy, reaching every corner of the universe. The gods' reign had come to an end, and the truth had been revealed. For the first time in history, the universe saw the gods not as invincible beings, but as mere mortals who had deceived the galaxy for far too long. The people of the galaxy, those who had lived in fear of the gods for centuries, now had hope. They could see, for the first time, that power was not something reserved for the few. It was something that could be earned, something that could be taken. And in that moment, humanity stood tall. The Erebus had proven that even the most powerful beings in the universe could be brought down. The gods were no longer the rulers of the galaxy. Humanity had taken their place.